титан, але найбільше ця частина. І ми розуміємо, куди вони йшли, як вони йшли з півночі, і що вони хотіли, але тим не менш ми все це відстояли. Розвинута була, потім вони все підірвали, Азовсталь тощо, але тим не менш.
Orisia, so US weapons in exchange for Ukraine's rare earth minerals. This sounds like a typical Trump deal situation.
This is what President Zelensky is proposing, that US companies can invest and explore those rare earth minerals, extract them, but then this comes with American security. If Trump is able to put enough pressure on Russia to stop the active phase of war, then it will open all of these economic opportunities.
Well, you're talking Trump-Ukraine and this whole idea of like trading military aid for access to, Ukrainian resources. It's a wild concept. We've got interviews with Trump himself, some news reports, people trying to make sense of it all.
Right.
Honestly, it feels like we're in like a political thriller or something, but the stakes are really real.
Yeah.
So like what's really going on here? Is this some kind of genius power play, or are we like headed for disaster? And then what about Ukraine's other allies like Poland? How are they reacting to all this?
It could be interesting to break it down, that's for sure.
Absolutely. So let's dive in.
All right.
Okay, so first of all, Trump saying they may be Russians someday.
Yeah.
Like, come on. Is he seriously suggesting he'd be okay with like a Russian takeover of Ukraine?
Well, you got to look at the context. I think Trump's really focused on like ending the war quickly, and he wants to see, a return on U.S. investment. So his statement, it's more like a prediction of a possible outcome, not like him saying, yeah, let's go with that.
Right.
It's more like him saying, look, if we don't change things up, this could be where we end up.
Okay, that makes sense. But then he drops this bomb about a $500 billion resource deal.
Yeah.
$500 billion with Ukraine in exchange for U.S. military aid. I mean, where did that number even come from?
That's where it gets really fascinating. He's talking about rare earth minerals.
Oh, okay.
Those elements you probably haven't thought about since high school chemistry.
Yeah.
But they're essential for everything.
Everything.
Pretty much smartphones, electric cars, military tech, you name it.
Wow.
And Ukraine happens to be sitting on like a gold mine of these minerals.
Really?
Oh, yeah. And Trump sees this as a way for the U.S. to, gain a strategic advantage.
Okay, so this is about more than just helping Ukraine. It's about the U.S. getting something in return.
Exactly.
Has the U.S. ever tied military aid to resource extraction this directly before?
Not really. It's definitely a different approach. It makes you wonder, is this just a one-time thing, or is this like a signal of a bigger shift in, U.S. foreign policy?
Interesting. Okay, so we've got Trump's angle, but what about Zelensky? I mean, is he just going along with all of this?
Well, here's the twist. The idea of using Ukrainian resources for U.S. military support that actually came from Zelensky.
What? Really?
Yeah, he's the one who first suggested it.
Wait a minute. Why would he offer up his country's resources like that?
Well, Zelensky's in a tough spot. He's really worried about what'll happen if Russia takes control of these rare earth minerals.
Oh, I see.
Imagine those resources in the wrong hands. It could totally destabilize the whole region, maybe even the world.
Right.
So he's trying to frame Ukraine as, a key player in global security, not just a victim.
So he's basically saying, help us, and you'll be helping yourself.
Exactly. He even appealed directly to Trump and used the word security when he talked about the mineral deal.
Clever.
Right. It's a subtle way, but it's powerful.
Yeah.
He's positioning Ukraine as an asset to the U.S.
Yeah, it's like you're more likely to help someone if they offer you something valuable in return.
Right, exactly.
Okay, but it makes me think, what about Europe? They need these rare earth minerals too, right?
Well,
Are they just sitting this one out?
You're right on the money. The EU is very interested in Ukrainian resources, and they're already a strategic partner. So there's a real possibility of competition between the U.S. and Europe for access to these minerals.
Competition is never good.
Right. And then let's not forget about Poland. They're right next door to Ukraine and a key U.S. ally.
Yeah, Poland's perspective on this has got to be interesting.
Oh, absolutely.
Welcome back. So last time we ended with this revelation, I guess you could say, about China's role in all this.
Yeah.
It sounds like they're not just watching from the sidelines. They're actually players in this whole Ukraine thing.
Oh, absolutely they are. And remember those rare earth minerals we talked about, the ones that everyone's making deals over?
Yeah, those.
Well, China pretty much controls that global market right now. So they're definitely paying attention to what happens with Ukraine's reserves.
That makes sense. So they're not taking sides publicly, but behind the scenes, they're probably making moves with both Russia and Ukraine.
Exactly. They're playing it smart, keeping their options open.
Kind of like hedging their bets.
Exactly. They're setting themselves up to be in a powerful position no matter who comes out on top.
It's like they can't lose.
Yeah, it's a classic example of real politics.
Yeah.
You know, looking out for your own interests above all else.
Right, right. But how does this affect the chances for peace? Does China's involvement make it more or less likely?
That's the million-dollar question. On the one hand, China thrives on stability. You know, global conflicts disrupt trade and create uncertainty.
Yeah, that's not good for business.
Right, so it's possible they might actually push for some kind of negotiated settlement.
But couldn't they also use a longer conflict to their advantage?
That's the other side of the coin. We've seen China getting more assertive lately, so this could be an opportunity for them to, you know, expand their influence.
Right, like if they broker a peace deal, they could position themselves as the heroes, the ones who saved the day.
Yeah. Exactly. A real power play.
Okay, so we don't really know China's true motives. They could be the peacemakers, or they could be taking advantage of the situation.
That's a bit of a mystery.
This whole thing, it's like we've gone from a political thriller to a full-blown spy movie.
It's a good reminder that geopolitics, it's rarely straightforward. You know, it's all about these competing interests, hidden agendas, and shifting alliances.
Yeah, and in the middle of all this, you've got the Ukrainian people. Their
Yeah.
lives, their homes, their future. It's all up in the air while these global powers are playing their games.
Which brings us back to Zelensky and the choices he has to make. Does he stand firm and demand, you know, complete control of his territory and NATO membership, even if it means more fighting and suffering?
Right.
Or does he accept a compromise that feels like a loss, but, you know, maybe saves lives and gives them a chance to rebuild?
Those are some tough options. I
Yeah.
can't imagine having to make those kinds of decisions.
And any peace deal, it's probably going to involve some serious concessions.
Well,
We could be talking about losing territory, maybe giving up on joining NATO. It's not just about politics. It's about people's lives, their homes, their sense of identity. Think about it. You've got families that have lived in those disputed areas for generations, and
Right.
suddenly they're being told they're living in a different country.
that's a lot to process.
Yeah. It's way more than just drawing lines on a map.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's important to remember there's no one Ukrainian perspective on this. There are a lot of different opinions, regional differences, historical baggage that all plays into how people see this conflict.
Right. So Zelensky's got this incredibly complicated situation. He's got Trump pushing for a deal, Europe watching nervously, and China lurking in the background. Is there any way he comes out of this looking like a winner?
I guess it depends on what winning means in this situation. It's
Right.
unlikely he'll get everything he originally wanted. This might be a situation where the best he can hope for is damage control. Securing a peace that keeps Ukraine independent, even if it means making some tough compromises. That might be the most realistic path to stability in the long run. It makes you wonder, what would you do if you were Zelensky? Would you hold out for the ideal outcome, knowing it could cost lives?
Yeah.
Or would you choose the practical path, even if it meant accepting something that felt like a defeat?
It's a question we should all think about because the fate of Ukraine, it's not just in the hands of these powerful people. The decisions they make in Washington, Kyiv, Brussels, Beijing, they'll affect all of us in some way.
That's a pretty sobering thought. Okay, so we've got Ukraine stuck in this geopolitical tug of war. China maybe tipping the scales and Zelensky facing impossible choices. But there's one piece we haven't talked about yet, Russia. What do they want out of all this? Are they really trying to take over all of Ukraine, or is there something else going on?
That's what we'll explore in the final part of our deep dive.
Okay.
Figuring out Russia's motivations and their strategy. That's the key to understanding how this might all end. So join us as we try to get inside the mind of the bear and see what their next move might be.
So we've been talking about this whole Ukraine situation, and honestly, it feels like every time we peel back a layer, there's another layer underneath.
It's complicated.
It really is.
Yeah.
And now we're getting to the core of it all, Russia. What are they really after here?
Well, Russia's motives, they're a mix of things, history, security concerns, and this desire to be a major power again. Analysts have been debating for years whether they actually want to conquer all of Ukraine or if they have something else in mind.
Okay, so let's start with the history. Russia and Ukraine have this long and complicated relationship.
Yeah.
I mean, they were both part of the Soviet Union, and there were these deep cultural and linguistic ties between them.
Absolutely. And for Russia, Ukraine isn't just some neighbor. They see it as a vital part of their historical sphere of influence. It's like a buffer zone between them and the West.
Okay, a buffer zone.
Yeah.
So they don't want NATO or Western influence right on their border. But, I mean, is that fear legitimate, or is it more like paranoia?
It's probably a bit of both. Remember, Russia has been invaded many times throughout history, so they see NATO expansion as a direct threat to their security.
Okay, that makes sense.
But there's also this strong sense of nationalism, this desire to make Russia great again. Putin himself has talked about the collapse of the Soviet Union as a geopolitical catastrophe.
Right.
So taking back Ukraine would be a huge step towards, reversing that.
So it's this mix of security concerns, historical baggage, and maybe a little bit of imperialism. But what does that actually mean in terms of goals? What are they trying to achieve in Ukraine?
It's probably a combination of things. Taking control of those eastern regions where there's already a lot of pro-Russian support, that's a big one. I mean, that's why they took Crimea back in 2014.
Yeah.
They also want to weaken Ukraine militarily so it can't pose a threat to them in the future.
Okay, but what about the rest of Ukraine? Are they willing to risk a full-scale invasion and occupation?
Yeah.
I mean, that seems like a recipe for a disaster, even for a country as powerful as Russia.
That's the big unknown. Occupying a country as big as Ukraine, with a population that's mostly against them, would be a logistical and economic nightmare. It would be like trying to swallow a porcupine, messy and painful.
Yeah, I can see that.
So it's more likely that they're aiming for a weakened and unstable Ukraine that stays under their influence rather than a complete takeover.
So not so much about taking over the whole country, but more about control. Making sure Ukraine doesn't get too close to the West.
Exactly. They want to keep Ukraine on a short leash. And one way to do that is by putting a pro-Russian government in place, or at least a government that's willing to cooperate with Moscow.
So this peace plan that we've been hearing about, the one that Trump was pushing for, does that fit into Russia's strategy? Could that be a way for them to get what they want without a full-scale invasion?
Absolutely. A peace deal that forces Ukraine to give up territory or abandon their hopes of joining NATO, that would be a huge win for Russia.
Yeah.
They could spin it as a diplomatic victory and present themselves as the peacemakers.
It's crazy how it all connects. You've got Trump wanting a deal, Zelensky fighting for his country's survival, and Russia potentially using a peace agreement to get what they want. It's like a high-stakes chess game with millions of lives hanging in the balance. But here's what I don't get. If Russia's so powerful, why not just go in and take what they want? Why all the complicated maneuvering and diplomacy?
Well, there are a few reasons. One, a full-scale invasion would be incredibly costly. Casualties, economic sanctions. The Russian people might not be too happy about another expensive war, especially with their economy already struggling.
Yeah, the sanctions have been hitting them hard.
Exactly. And two, a blatant military takeover would really alienate the Ukrainian people and make it much harder to control them in the long run.
Right.
It's much easier to control a country if they believe, at least to some extent, that you're acting in their best interests.
So it's not just about military power. It's about soft power. About shaping the story and how people see things. It's about making people believe you're the good guy, even when you're doing some pretty bad things.
Yeah, exactly. That's where propaganda and disinformation come into play. Russia has been working hard to control the narrative, both at home and abroad. They want to paint themselves as the victims, as the ones defending themselves against the West.
Wow, it's scary to think how much influence they have through media and information.
Yeah.
Like a whole other battleground.
It's a war of perceptions, and it's just as important as the actual fighting.
So we've got Russia playing the long game, using military pressure, diplomacy, and information warfare to get what they want. And in the middle of all of this, you've got Zelensky trying to navigate this minefield and find a way to secure the best possible future for his country.
It's a real David versus Goliath situation, and the odds are definitely not in his favor. But he's shown incredible resilience and determination.
Yeah, it's inspiring to see. It's a reminder that even when things seem hopeless, there's always hope. And that even against overwhelming power, individuals can still make a difference.
Absolutely. The future of Ukraine is still being written, and there are many chapters left to come. But one thing's for sure, the decisions made in the next few weeks and months, they'll have a huge impact not just on Ukraine, but on the whole world.
This deep dive has been eye-opening. We've explored the history of Russia and Ukraine, uncovered the hidden motives of global powers, and seen the courage of a nation fighting for survival. We started with this idea of a resource deal, and it's led us to a much deeper understanding of a conflict that's shaping the future of the world.
And hopefully it's given you, the listener, a lot to think about, because in the end, the future isn't set in stone. It's shaped by the choices we make, the information we consume, and the conversations we have.
So stay informed, stay engaged, and keep asking those tough questions. Because in a world this complex, the truth is often hiding in plain sight, just waiting for us to discover it.